Every Saturday morning, Elliot Rowe mowed his lawn with the same quiet determination he'd shown for 40 years. But that morning, a shriek across the hedges changed everything. The sun had just cleared the tips of the loblolly pines, casting golden light over Pine Hollow's carefully manicured streets. The scent of dew and honeysuckle mixed with the rhythmic cough of a decades-old Toro mower starting up again. Elliot moved methodically, rows neat, edges sharp. He'd been tending this small patch of grass since his daughter was in high school. Now, retired, widowed, and steady as ever, he still found comfort in the crisp symmetry of a freshly cut lawn. 2 houses down, flags fluttered gently from white porch posts, wind chimes jingled from Miss Nancy's porch, somewhere a cardinal chirped its first song of the day. Elliot had just lined up the mower to start his third pass when a sharp voice sliced through the calm. "Hey, hey, what do you think you're doing?" He looked up. There she was, Trish Knowles, in all her early morning fury, cardigan draped across her shoulders like she'd stepped out of a country club catalogue, arms crossed, tight, mouth pulled into a hard, thin line. "You're not authorized to run that thing before 8:30, she barked, waving toward the mower as though it were spewing radioactive noise. "Noise Regulation 3B, I emailed everyone." Elliot turned off the engine and took a moment before responding. "Morning, Trish. Didn't see that email. Been cutting at this time for decades now." "That doesn't make it legal," she snapped. "We have standards. This is a peaceful community, Mr. Rowe, not a tractor pull." The sarcasm wasn't new. Trish had a way of speaking that turned everything into a reprimand, even greetings. Elliot offered a half-smile, the kind that said he wasn't interested in an argument but wouldn't be bullied either. She advanced a few feet, her heels sinking slightly into the grass. "And another thing, where's your noise compliance certificate?" "I didn't know I needed one," he replied, adjusting the strap of his ball cap. "Just mowing my lawn, like always." Trish huffed, as if the air itself offended her. "Well, if you won't listen to me, maybe the sheriff can explain it to you." Before Elliot could respond, she had already pulled out her phone. "Yes, hello, I'd like to report a noise violation. Yes, it's ongoing." Elliot stared, unsure whether to laugh or sigh. Across the street, Luann Davis stood watering her petunias, her eyebrows raised as she caught Elliot's eye and mouthed, "Lord help us." It took 20 minutes for the sheriff's cruiser to roll up. Sheriff Wilkes stepped out slowly, his aviators perched low on his nose, expression unreadable. He greeted Elliot with a nod. "Morning." "Morning, Sheriff." Trish rushed forward before either man could speak. "He's violating Regulation 3B, and he refused to acknowledge the HOA guidelines. He is operating without compliance forms." Wilkes held up a hand. "Trish, it's 7:45. It's a lawnmower." "It's a violation," she said indignantly. "We pay dues for a peaceful environment." Wilkes turned toward Elliot. "You causing a ruckus over here, Elliot?" "No louder than usual," Elliot said evenly. "Same machine I've used since 3. The sheriff turned back to Trish. "I don't see any reason to intervene. Not unless... You're telling me he's running a chainsaw at dawn?" "He's flaunting the rules." Wilkes tilted his head. "Your HOA rules don't override Georgia State Code, ma'am, and last I checked, mowing your own lawn wasn't a criminal offense." Trish opened her mouth, then closed it again. The silence that followed was thick enough to bottle. "Well," she huffed, "I'll be filing an official complaint." Elliot nodded once. "You do what you have to." She stomped away, muttering, and returned 5 minutes later with a folded sheet of paper, which she stuck into Elliot's mailbox with theatrical precision before disappearing behind her pristine white door. He waited until she was gone, then retrieved the paper. First strike notice. Violation 3B, unauthorized equipment noise. Action required. Cease operation immediately. Failure to comply will result in fine and possible suspension of privileges. Elliot folded the page in half without a word. The sheriff had already left, and the mower sat quiet in the morning sun. Luann waved from her yard, shaking her head with an exasperated grin. Elliot gave her a small wave, then walked slowly up the front steps of his house and slipped inside. The living room smelled faintly of cedar and old books. He made his way to the hallway, then reached for the hallway closet, not for his jacket or umbrella, but for the top shelf where a small tin key box sat tucked behind an old vase. The key was cool to the touch, iron and heavy with memory. He hadn't used it in years. In the attic, dust danced through slats of light. Elliot navigated old boxes, photo albums, a rocking horse from when his daughter was small. At the far end, a trunk rested beneath a folded American flag. The key turned with a soft click. The hinges creaked as he lifted the lid. A few files sat neatly stacked, labels written in Grace's careful hand. Tax records. Blueprints. One folder had faded slightly, its tab marked in thick black ink. HOA No. 399. He pulled it out, sat on the edge of an old cedar chest, and opened it. The scent of dry paper filled the room. Inside were the original HOA bylaws, printed on cream-colored stock, complete with the original signatures, his, Grace's, and 3 others, long moved or passed on. He picked up a dusty binder labeled Original Bylaws, Pine Hollow HOA, paused, and whispered, "Grace, what have they done?" Some truths don't hide in the shadows. They wait, neatly filed, time-stamped, and signed in attics like Eliot's. The attic had a way of holding its breath. Dust hung in the golden shafts of light that filtered through the slats. Eliot moved slowly, careful not to bump into the low rafters, his feet brushing the same wooden boards he tiptoed across as a younger man, back when he'd sneak up here with Grace to store Christmas decorations and baby clothes. Everything up here had weight, not just in dust and time, but in memory. The tin key still hung from his fingers as he knelt beside the cedar trunk he hadn't opened in over a decade. He remembered the way Grace used to label everything with her thick black marker, no sticky notes or neon tags, just her handwriting, neat and decisive. The folder labeled HOA 1999 sat exactly where he expected, its edges curled from the Georgia humidity. He opened it, and the scent of aged paper and cedar hit him like a whisper from the past. The first few pages were mundane, meeting minutes, voting logs, typed-up versions of policies about trash bins and tree trimming. Then came the real prize, a signed copy of the original bylaws, stamped and notarized. 5 names stood out at the bottom, his, Grace's, and 3 others he hadn't seen in years. But it was Clause 4.1 that stopped him cold. No amendments shall be valid unless signed by the original founder or legal successor. He stared at that sentence, blinking, the words gradually sinking into place like pebbles settling at the bottom of a stream. No one had ever asked for his signature, not once, and yet the HOA had ballooned into something unrecognizable, a maze of regulations, fines, and fear, all wielded by Trish Knowles like a baton at a marching band. Behind him the stairs creaked. "Hope you're decent," came Loan's voice, followed by the creak of the attic hatch. "I brought caffeine, black, like your patience." He smiled and turned. "Come on up, but mind the 4th board. It squeaks worse than Trish at a town hall." Loan handed him the steaming mug and sat cross-legged on a faded blanket nearby. She wore her Saturday gardening hat, the one with the fake sunflower on top, and looked around with quiet reverence. "You haven't changed a thing up here." "Neither has she," Eliot murmured, pointing to the folder in his lap. Luann sipped her coffee. "You and Grace built this place with your bare hands and a stack of papers. Don't ever let them forget that." He handed her the page with Clause 4.1. Her brow furrowed as she read, then slowly lifted. She never mentioned this, not once. "You're still on file?" "Looks like it," Elio said, "which means everything they've changed since isn't legal." Luann let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be. That woman's been barking orders like she wrote the Constitution." Elliot chuckled, but his eyes stayed on the signature line beneath Grace's name. She believed in this neighborhood. She wanted rules, sure, but ones that made sense, not power plays. Luann nodded, then tapped the paper. "You need to talk to someone who knows the law." "I already know who," Elliot said, rising with a slight groan in his knees. "Jim Ballard. Retired 3 years ago, but his fax machine's still humming." Back downstairs, Elliot dusted off his old desk and lined up the pages for scanning. The machine clicked and whirred, sending each sheet across the phone line with mechanical certainty. A minute later, the phone rang. "Elliot," came the familiar gruff voice. "You better tell me this isn't a prank." "Not even close," Elliot said. "You get the file?" "I got it, and if what you sent me is still valid, and it sure looks like it is, you're not just a homeowner, you're the last legal authority the HOA has." Elliot closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of that realization pressing gently on his chest. When he opened them, they landed on the old photo frame sitting beside the fax. He and Grace, standing beside the first flagpole ever raised at Pine Hollow. Her hand rested on his shoulder, her smile calm and certain. He stood, brushed off his jeans, and grabbed his keys. Frank's Diner hadn't changed much since the ADS. The booth still had that same squeaky red vinyl, and Ruth still worked the breakfast shift, pouring coffee with the precision of someone who'd been doing it longer than some patrons had been alive. "Morning, Ruth," Elliot greeted as he slid into a booth. "Morning, sugar, your usual?" "Please, he said with a tired smile, and maybe something sweet, if you're feeling generous. She winked and brought him a plate with a ham and egg sandwich and a warm cinnamon bun, fresh out of the oven. And don't you dare tip me more than $2. Deal, he said, setting down 2 crisp ones anyway. They chatted for a while. Weather, the garden club, someone's grandson enlisting in the Navy. Ruth never asked about HOA drama, and for that Elliot was grateful. But as he looked out the wide diner window, the weight of what he'd uncovered returned. He finished his sandwich, thanked Ruth again, and headed home. The mailbox creaked as he opened it. Empty. Good. But as he walked around to the back gate, his steps slowed. Across the street, Trish Knowles was at it again, her arms stiff as she smoothed tape across a laminated warning sign pinned to Elliot's fence. Her posture was sharp, her movements purposeful, as if daring anyone to stop her. Elliot looked at her from his kitchen window, then leaned a shoulder against the doorframe. The sunlight hit his worn floorboards in soft streaks, and somewhere outside a mockingbird sang. He smiled. All right, then. Trish believed silence meant submission. She was about to learn that silence can also be strategy. The morning air carried a sticky weight, the kind that hinted summer was arriving ahead of schedule. Pine Hollow's quiet streets shimmered with heat rising off the pavement, and sprinklers ticked away in manicured front lawns. The American flags left over from Memorial Day still fluttered lazily on porches, though the town's mood was anything but patriotic. Elliot opened his front door just in time to see Trish stapling a laminated notice to the maple tree in his yard. Her movements were quick, clipped, her lips drawn tight. Violation notice, the sign read in bold red letters. Community disruption, pending review. She stepped back to admire her work and caught Elliot watching. Good morning, she said, as if pinning paper to someone's property was the neighborly thing to do. Elliot gave her a quiet nod. Didn't realize we'd entered poster season. She sniffed. It's necessary. People need to know what's happening. They usually do, Elliot said, closing the door behind him. Inside, he laid the HOA charter flat on the table. The circle around Clause 4.1 stood out like a red warning light. It was time for others to see what he saw. Later that afternoon, he walked to the neighborhood message board near the mail kiosk, the sun glinting off the metal as he lifted the plexiglass cover. Carefully, he pinned a scanned copy of the original HOA bylaws, highlighted, dated, and signed. He circled the key clause in thick red ink. No amendments shall be valid unless signed by the original founder or legal successor. No commentary, no accusation, just the truth, quietly presented. By evening, whispers were already moving through Pine Hollow like wind through tall grass. At Ruth's Coffee, where the ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, 2 retirees read the notice aloud while nursing sweet teas. At the grocery store, Luann overheard someone mutter, "Why didn't we know about this before?" And at dusk, Mark Tillman showed up at Elliot's front gate. Mark was a tall man, mid-50s, always looked like he'd just come from a yard sale, shirt untucked, sandals over socks. He had served as HOA treasurer for 5 years, but rarely spoke up at meetings. Elliot met him halfway down the walk. "I read the notice," Mark said, voice low. "Is it real?" Elliot handed him the original document. Mark scanned the page, eyes pausing at the signatures. "If this is true, she's in trouble." "I didn't pose it to cause a stir," Elliot said. "Just figured folks ought to know what they've signed up for, or not signed up for." Mark nodded slowly. "She won't like it." "She already doesn't," Elliot said, lips curling. As they spoke, a car slowed at the curb. Daniel Knowles sat behind the wheel, one arm resting on the open window. He looked nothing like his mother, calmer, quieter. His expression was unreadable as he watched the 2 men talk. When Elliot glanced over, Daniel offered a slight nod, then drove on. Back inside, Elliot sat at the table and jotted a quick note to himself. Review Section 5.2, Meeting Authority? He was halfway through folding it into a folder when he heard a sharp thud against the screen door. An envelope. He retrieved it, turning it over. Heavy stock, HOA letterhead, gold seal, too formal for neighborhood business. Inside, the language was thick with legalese, but the message was clear. Cease and desist. Dear Mr. Rowe, you are hereby ordered to cease any and all unauthorized postings or dissemination of non-verified documents pertaining to HOA operations. Failure to comply may result in legal action, fines, or removal of privileges. It was signed Trish Knowles, HOA president and stamped with a mock compliance seal that looked suspiciously like a dollar store sticker. Elliot rubbed his temples. The smell of fresh paper and arrogance wafted off the letter. He walked back to the desk, pulled out his fax machine, and fed the letter through. The call connected with a few beeps, then silence. A moment later, the phone rang. "Tell me this is a joke," Jim's voice came through, half growl, half chuckle. "Nope," Elliot said, stretching out in his chair. "This isn't just bluffing, Elle. She may have just crossed a legal line." While others grilled hot dogs, Patricia Knowles grilled Elliot with HOA threats. And this time, the town was watching. The Memorial Day BBQ at Pine Hollow had always been more about routine than celebration. Each year, long folding tables appeared on the clubhouse lawn, covered in red, white, and blue plastic cloths. Retirees in flag-themed T-shirts gathered to play checkers under the old oak, and children darted between chairs, waving tiny stars and stripes pinwheels. Sweet tea flowed like water, and peach cobbler disappeared faster than it was served. This year, however, the air felt heavier. Not from the humidity, though the Georgia heat was beginning to settle on the neighborhood like a wool blanket, but from the tension simmering just beneath the surface of every polite smile and distracted small talk. Elliot stood near the edge of the gathering, wearing his usual khaki slacks and a soft denim shirt. In one hand, he held a thick envelope, neatly sealed and addressed in his careful handwriting. He'd mailed identical copies to every HOA board member that morning, but this one was for the woman at the center of it all. Trish Knowles was standing near the drink table, her posture regal even in the heat. A string of pearls lay against her collarbone, glinting in the sun. She held a clipboard as if it were a badge of office and was addressing a small crowd about community upkeep and seasonal uniformity of lawn edges. Elliot approached quietly, waited for her to pause between sentences, and extended the envelope. "For you," he said simply. She took it without looking, tucked it under her clipboard, and continued speaking. "I cannot stress enough the importance of adhering to trash bin concealment standards. Visibility damages property values." Elliot nodded once and stepped away. It didn't take long. Someone, no one could say exactly who, nudged Trish, pointed at the envelope. She opened it mid-sentence, her voice trailing off as she scanned the first page. She blinked once, twice. Then, in a movement far less composed than usual, she crumpled the letter in her hand and shoved it into her purse. Her smile returned, but it was thinner now, more forced. She quickly pivoted back to her speech about shrub height regulations. Elliot, meanwhile, was pinning a single page beside the sweet tea dispenser, an enlarged, high-contrast copy of the HOA's original charter, the same one he had retrieved from his attic. Right beneath the header, he had circled Clause 4.1 in thick red marker. No amendments shall be valid unless signed by the original founder or legal successor. A few neighbors noticed, then a few more. Soon, a half-moon of curious residents had formed around the posting, murmuring, "Is this real?" one man asked. Elliot didn't answer, but he didn't need to. Mark Tillman pushed his way to the front, eyes scanning the document. His voice was low but clear. "This is real. I saw Grace sign it back then." The crowd turned slightly, the atmosphere shifting. Some looked at Trish, who was still speaking, though now her sentences stumbled over themselves. Daniel stood off to the side, arms crossed, eyes fixed not on Elliot, but on his mother. There was a flicker of something unfamiliar in his gaze. Not anger, not pride, but uncertainty. When Trish finally seemed to sense the shift in attention, she stepped away from the drink table and stormed toward the posted document. "This is a forgery," she declared loudly, voice trembling. "It's fabricated. It's meant to confuse and mislead. Elliot is not a legal authority here." No one replied. Some looked away. Others simply watched her, silent. Her voice rose. "This is misinformation. These aren't official documents." But even as she spoke, Mark stepped forward again, quieter this time. "I've seen the original binder. That's Grace's signature, and Elliot's. From day one." Trish's face flushed a shade darker. She glanced at Daniel, who didn't move. A beat passed. Then she turned on her heel and marched back to her folding chair. The BBQ resumed, but something had shifted. Conversations grew quieter, laughter less frequent. People passed the drink table with side glances at the posted charter, as if it might whisper something to them if they looked too long. Children still played. The country music still played softly from a Bluetooth speaker tucked under the shade of the clubhouse overhang, but the spell of Trish's untouchable authority had cracked. As the crowd thinned and the sun began to slip behind the rooftops, Elliot felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Mark. He leaned in, voice low, eyes serious. "I want to talk. Privately. I think I've made a mistake." They expected Elliot to show up angry. He brought law instead. The clubhouse hadn't changed much since it was built. Beige paneling, brown carpet with a pattern that once tried to be fashionable, and a faint scent of lemon cleaner that clung to every surface. A single ceiling fan creaked overhead as neighbors filed in slowly, each one holding a copy of the hastily emailed HOA meeting agenda. But he had arrived with a small manila folder tucked under his arm. He nodded politely to those he passed, many of whom responded with quiet nods, some with tentative smiles. There was a different energy tonight, less of the usual deference, more curiosity, maybe even hope. Trish stood at the front of the room, flanked by 2 board members. Her pearls were in place, her clipboard stacked with notes. She adjusted the microphone and cleared her throat. "We are here," she began, "to restore order." Her tone was crisp, familiar. It had the practiced cadence of someone used to being obeyed. "Recent disruptions," she continued, "have threatened the stability and cohesion of our community. False documents have been circulated. Misinformation has been weaponized." Murmurs stirred through the room. "I will now review our compliance bylaws and take questions." "Excuse me," Elliot said gently, rising from the second row. His voice wasn't loud, but it stopped the room. Trish blinked. "Mr. Rowell, please. This isn't a debate." "I won't debate," he said. "I'll simply present facts." He stepped forward, unfolding the manila folder with calm precision. From it he pulled a clear binder, a notarized document, and a stamped envelope. "This," Elliot said, holding the binder aloft, "is the original Pine Hollow HOA charter, dated 1999, signed by the founding members, including my late wife, Grace." Trish folded her arms. "That document is not recognized under current board revisions." Elliot didn't flinch. "Which brings me to this." He laid down the notarized paper. "A certified affidavit confirming that no amendments to this charter are valid unless signed by a founder or their legal successor. That clause still stands. It was never repealed, never voted on, and never legally altered." Gasps rippled through the room. "And this," he continued, tapping the third item, "is confirmation from the county records office. They've verified the original charter is still on file and binding." Trish's lips thinned. "That proves nothing." A voice crackled from a speaker in the corner. "Actually," came Jim's dry drawl, "it proves quite a bit." The crowd turned toward the speakerphone set on the edge of the board's table. "This is Jim Ballard," the voice continued. "I've reviewed the documents Mr. Rowe submitted. I practiced HOA and municipal law in this state for 32 years. The original charter is not only valid, it supersedes every unratified revision your board has enacted." Mark looked up sharply. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Jim said, "any enforcement actions taken under invalid amendments, fines, notices, threats, may be considered legally unenforceable." The room went still. Mark stood. "I motion to suspend Patricia Knowles from HOA presidency pending full legal review." Silence. Trish sputtered, "You can't—" But Mark turned to the others seated at the board table. "Is there any opposition?" No hands rose. No words came. Just the whir of the ceiling fan and the soft clink of someone setting down a coffee cup. Elliot watched as the shift happened, not just in titles and motions, but in posture. Neighbors who had once sat stiffly now leaned forward. A woman near the back wiped her eyes. "I trusted you," she said softly, voice breaking. "You fined me for planting roses." Trish's face blanched. The board offered no comfort. She gathered her papers with stiff, deliberate movements, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She didn't look at anyone as she made her way toward the exit. "This isn't over," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Elliot watched her go, face calm, his hand resting on the charter. "When the queen loses her crown, the peasants stop whispering and start acting." By Sunday afternoon, Pine Hollow had fallen into an unusual hush. The birds still called from the magnolias. A lawnmower buzzed faintly 2 blocks over, but something beneath the surface had shifted, like a breeze changing direction before anyone could see the leaves move. Elliot stood at his mailbox flipping through credit card offers and a church flyer when he noticed the first one gone. The laminated compliance reminder sign that had hung from Mrs. Granger's porch railing for over a year had vanished. In its place was a ceramic wind chime clinking softly in the heat. Further down the street, someone had pulled the no sidewalk chalk notice off a community bench, and as he turned the corner, he saw a teenager, barefoot, grinning, drawing stars in pink chalk on the curb. No one stopped him. The clubhouse bulletin board now held a single sheet, the original HOA charter, neatly pinned, untouched. At Roots Coffee, neighbors sipped their drinks slower. They spoke in voices that had dropped their caution. Luann leaned in toward Elliot, her smile warmer than usual. "It's funny," she said, stirring her iced tea, "how quiet things get after a storm. But this feels like breathing again." Later that day, Daniel knocked at Elliot's door. No clipboard, no rehearsed tone, just a young man with tired eyes and a soft, steady voice. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, after Elliot invited him to sit on the porch, "for how she treated you, for how long she treated everyone." Elliot nodded, listening without interrupting. "I thought she was protecting something," Daniel continued, "but I think she was just afraid of losing control, and maybe I let it go on too long." Elliot took a slow sip of water and set the glass down. "You're not your mother." Daniel looked up, uncertain. "And if you want to help fix what's broken," Elliot added, "I won't stop you." That evening, Luann hosted what she called a casual back fence gathering, no official invitations, just lemonade, folding chairs, and a dozen neighbors who'd once kept their heads down. One by one, stories spilled out like loosened bricks from a dam. She fined me for my shutters being too cream-colored. She threatened to report me over a wind spinner. I started parking 3 blocks away just to avoid her driveway rules. The voices weren't angry. They were tired, relieved, ready. Someone handed out index cards and pens asking, if we could rebuild this place with kindness, what would it look like? Across town, Tricia's voice remained absent. Her blinds were drawn, her mailbox stuffed but unopened. The next morning, Elliot found a thick envelope tucked against his screen door. No return address, but the style was unmistakable. Rigid, cream-colored, sharp-edged. Inside, he read, "To whom it may concern, you are hereby formally notified of a claim of defamation, reputational harm, and coercion against homeowners of Pine Hollow as a result of unauthorized distribution of documents and instigating public unrest." Elliot skimmed the rest, lips pressed into a line. The accusations were vague, the tone defensive. But one thing was clear, Trish hadn't surrendered, she had simply changed tactics. He didn't react immediately. Instead, he took the letter inside, laid it beside the binder on his kitchen table, and called Jim. 10 minutes later, Jim's voice crackled through the speaker, low and dry. "She has no standing, but if she pushes this, we'll end it in court." In a quiet courthouse 3 towns over, the battle for Pine Hollow's soul came down to signatures, bylaws, and one woman's refusal to accept the truth. The courthouse in Jasper County stood like a monument to a quieter age. White columns against soft blue sky, wooden benches polished by decades of restless hands. Inside, the small courtroom smelled faintly of paper and old leather, and ceiling fans spun lazily above rows of pew-like seating. Elliot sat near the front, his hands folded neatly over his lap. He wore his Sunday coat, not out of obligation, but out of respect. Beside him, Jim adjusted his glasses and reviewed a set of documents, their edges crisp and clean. The other side of the room painted a different picture. Patricia Knowles stood rigid beside a lawyer who looked as if he regretted accepting the case. She clutched her notes tightly, her expression set in the same thin line Pine Hollow had grown used to. The judge entered, his robes gently sweeping across the floorboards. Judge McKinley had the calm, weathered look of a man who'd once seen too many divorces and not enough justice. He took his seat and called the room to order with a tone that carried neither warmth nor disdain, only finality. "Let's proceed." Tricia's lawyer spoke first, outlining the claim. It sounded theatrical, even in legal phrasing, that Mr. Rowe had spread misinformation, intentionally destabilized the community, and slandered Mrs. Knowles' leadership. The judge listened, expression unreadable. Then came Jim's turn. "Your Honor," he began, voice steady, "what we are dealing with is not emotional grievance, but simple legal fact." He approached the bench with 3 items: the original Pine Hollow HOA charter, notarized and signed, a certified affidavit from the county clerk's office verifying the document's authenticity, and a statement of non-repeal signed by Elliot as the last founding member. Clause 4.1, Jim said, tapping the document gently, explicitly states that no amendments are valid unless signed by a founding member or legal successor. That has never occurred. Therefore, all subsequent bylaw modifications are invalid." Trish leaned toward her lawyer, whispering frantically. Judge McKinley raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Knowles, do you have documentation showing repeal or replacement of Clause 4.1? Her lawyer stood, cleared his throat, and adjusted his collar. "We do not, Your Honor." The judge turned his gaze to Trish. Her jaw worked silently for a moment before she spoke. "Everything I did was for the good of Pine Hollow," she said. "Someone had to maintain order." The judge nodded slowly, then turned his attention to the gallery. Among the seated residents, Daniel Knowles stood. His voice wasn't loud, but it filled the room. "Judge, she doesn't speak for us anymore." The silence that followed was weighty, not awkward, resolute. Judge McKinley leaned back in his chair, hands folded. "Then I see no cause to move forward with this claim." He paused. "In fact, given the misrepresentation of authority and lack of legal standing, I am referring this matter to the District Review Board for potential misuse of community governance powers." Trish gasped. Her lawyer shifted in his seat. Jim offered no gloating smile, only a slow nod. Elliot sat still, his face composed. When the room cleared, Trish slipped out quickly, her heels clicking too sharply against the hardwood. The door closed behind her with a hollow thud. Outside, the sun lit the courthouse steps in soft gold. Birds flitted from branch to branch in the nearby oaks. There was no cheer, no applause, only the kind of quiet that follows a long-awaited answer. Elliot stood at the base of the steps, watching the leaves stir in the wind. He felt Jim come up beside him. "You could file counter," Jim said gently. "Libel, harassment, even emotional distress." Elliot shook his head. "I only wanted to protect what my wife and I built." The breeze picked up slightly, lifting the edge of his coat. From behind, a hand touched his shoulder. It was Daniel. He looked unsure, but there was a sincerity in his voice that wasn't there before. "I'd like to help fix what's left, if you'll let me. No more fines, no more silent fear, just open yards, unlocked gates, and neighbors who finally looked one another in the eye." The sun had only just begun to climb, and already Pine Hollow felt different. A soft breeze carried the scent of lemon and mowed grass. Chalk drawings in bright colors crept up the sidewalks. Hearts, hopscotch lines, a lopsided eagle waving a tiny flag. A small lemonade stand had popped up near the corner of Maple and Grove, the cardboard sign reading "Free for Neighbors" in oversized crayon letters. Elliot stood under the shade of the old oak tree that marked the center of the neighborhood. Its roots ran deep, like everything else around here. In his hands was a freshly painted wooden sign. Daniel held the other end. Together they stepped toward the cleared patch of grass near the old HOA mailbox, now rusting gently in retirement. The new sign was simple, unadorned except for one bold message. "Welcome to Freedom Fields, where neighbors are free again." As they drove the last nail in, the sound of gentle applause broke out behind them. A dozen neighbors had gathered, some with dogs on leashes, others with folding chairs and cups of coffee. Luann wiped her cheek with the corner of her sleeve. Mark gave a quiet nod. Not far behind, Sheriff Wilkes stepped out of his cruiser, holding a thick envelope. "Official copy," he said, handing it to Elliot. "Dissolution of Pine Hollow HOA. Signed, sealed, and—" he tipped his hat. "Free." There was no speech, no ribbon-cutting, just a slow, collective exhale that seemed to ripple through the crowd like wind through wheat. By late morning, the first grills were rolling out. Luann brought over a battered radio that played Patsy Cline. Ruth from the diner appeared with a tray of warm cookies and a shrug. "On the house, y'all. Don't tell the health inspector." No one asked for permits. No one demanded uniform tablecloths. Children played tag across mismatched yards while grown-ups lingered in lawn chairs, swapping stories and second helpings. Someone passed around sweet tea. Someone else handed off slices of apple pie wrapped in napkins. An old man pulled out a guitar and plucked a slow tune, while two teenage boys added logs to the fire pit without being told. And in the middle of it all, neighbors, once silent behind hedges, talked, really talked. They traded tools, laughed at shared HOA horror stories, and made plans for a community garden that wouldn't need approval to plant carrots. At one point, a man in his 70s stood beside the drink table, paper plate in hand, and looked around with quiet awe. "I never thought I'd see this day," he said. "No HOA, no citations, just peace." The group around him fell still for a moment, as if honoring the gravity of that simple truth. As the sun dipped low, painting everything in amber light, Elliot returned home. He eased himself into the wooden rocker on his front porch. The wood creaked beneath him like an old friend clearing its throat. He looked across his yard, now his and no one else's, to where the new sign caught the evening light. Daniel had added 2 small flags to either side. The stars and stripes fluttered gently. He took a sip from his glass of water, feeling the stillness wrap around him like an old quilt. For the first time in a long time, Pine Hollow wasn't just a place, it was a home. The fences in Pine Hollow didn't come down with hammers. They came down with conversations, small nods of trust, and neighbors finally choosing one another over fear. What began as a quiet stand turned into a quiet revolution, not with noise, but with clarity, courage, and community. When rules are used for good, neighborhoods thrive. But when power becomes the point, even the best intentions can rot from the inside out. Maybe it's never too late to join hands across hedges, to remember that home isn't just property, it's people. Like a porch light left on through the night, one honest act can help a whole town find its way.